All right, I think we're going to get started, everyone. Thanks for coming. When Wipfli asked me to jump up here, I thought of a video that kind of, I think, describes how we at Aldridge currently handle some IT stuff. So I thought I'd play it for you.
Did they come back?
Iris. Come back tomorrow, and they'll be gone by then. We better get out of here before somebody sees us.
Well, it just kind of reminded me of how people see IT, and hopefully it just seems like everything's working perfectly, but then you got some guy in a closet pulling all the strings, and hopefully it still keeps working until you can't fool somebody anymore.
The Rube Goldberg machine.
Exactly. So I'm Pat Laud. I'm the IT director at Aldridge Electric. I've been there about 17 years, and here with the Wipfli guys.
Yeah, Riley Campbell, manager in our construction and real estate technology practice at Wipfli. Spend my day architecting enterprise level, multi-system level integrations in the space.
Hey guys, my name is Ryan Rademann. My third Procore Groundbreak. Who's got me beat on a number of groundbreaks that we've been to? Okay, very good. I focus on construction technology at Wipfli. I'm a big fan of Procore, but spend a lot of time with Procore, with many ERPs, and a number of other operational systems and analytics type systems that we're going to be talking about tying together effectively here today.
So just a little bit about Aldridge. We're a specialty electrical subcontractor, sometimes get into some GC stuff, but work on complex critical infrastructure all over the United States. Family owned for 70 years, $800 million in revenue, 1,500 employees. And yeah, if you're in the electrical contracting space, you've probably heard of us.
So Wipfli is a technology consulting firm and also a CPA firm. And so we spend a lot of time with the CFO, with leaders in operations and IT. And a lot of you probably know that IT and the finance and accounting teams tend to kind of have a little bit of overlap. And so, our digital arm is very focused on exactly this intersection between systems and process and people. And so we spend time consulting in the weeds on the implementations of many of the different tools that you all use, but of course making them talk effectively as well, and then a lot on the strategy level on which ones we ought to be picking and how we make them work together and how we see them adapted really effectively so that we get people that love what's going on with technology as opposed to people coming at us with pitchforks or viewing us the way Patrick kind of likes to humbly think of himself as, like this, this Rube Goldberg machine coordinator in the background. So Wipfli's presence, kind of like Aldridge and like many of you, is kind of coast to coast. We're headquartered in Milwaukee. I sit in Chicago, and Riley sits in Denver, so local to many of you.
I'll get us kicked off here, diving into really the content of our session today. So from an agenda perspective, do a little bit of a primer, right? We're talking integration. Then I'll get into some limitations of what we call these traditional solutions, right? These are point-to-point integrations, connectors that I'm sure a lot of you use out in the marketplace today. We'll talk about why we envision that is kind of a first step in an integration methodology, but there is a future to that you can start to take on today within your organization. We'll get into that future, iPaaS. Pat will do a little bit of a case study for us, how Aldridge Electric looks at their integrations and how they're going about iPaaS implementation. Ryan will then look at a step further here into some AI and more future data-driven decisions, and then we'll wrap up with some QA and discussion. First thing that I want to do, a little show of hands here. Okay, what does your current integration stack look like? Those in the room that have literal swivel chair integrations, rekeying in one system, going to the next tab. Anyone in the room that's doing that?
Not alone.
Okay. How about a point-to-point type integration using connectors, Procore, Sage Intacct? Anything there? Lot of the group. How about anyone in the room that has already jumped into this iPaaS future, iPaaS, Boomi, Workato? Anyone? Okay, a couple of them. Right. So I want to start here with what is a relatively rudimentary example. Okay, we're gonna look at your phone. Now this is something that you can maybe take back to those on your team, maybe your leadership, executive teams. Start to spell out this vision of iPaaS. Okay, take a look at your phone. Okay, you have a contact on your phone in your contact app. Okay, if you don't have any type of integration here, what you may need to do is you meet someone new. You enter their contact in that contact application. Then you want to call them. You go to your phone application. Well, you have no integration of your contact there, so now you have to re-enter your contact in the phone app. You want to send them a text message. Same thing. Go in, add a new person to text, and then you want to set up an appointment, put them in your calendar. You're there again in your calendar application, needing to create a new contact. Okay. This is a world on your phone where none of this data is integrated. We take a step into what may be a connector point-to-point type integration flow. So you create a new contact in your contact directory. That may integrate to your phone, your call application, to your text message application, and your calendar application, but it's built in a way that is single point-to-point integrations. Each point that you're integrating this data presents an opportunity for the integration to fail, for your data to get siloed, for data to disappear as it moves through this chain of integrations. iPaaS can be looked at as how your phone actually works, right? So you add a contact in your contact directory. That is immediately within your phone, your call system, your text system, and your calendar. As you update data in any one of these systems related to that contact, it is immediately available within all of these other applications. So we'll talk a little bit more about these limitations of traditional solutions. And again, traditional solutions, we are talking about point-to-point integrations using connectors or custom integration builds. A couple things here. Okay, they're rigid and they're outdated, and they are a one-size-fits-all approach. What this means is that as your systems change, or as your systems upgrade, or you want to go and customize some data flow process that is specific to how you run your business, it becomes very difficult to update that integration and find all of the different aspects within this daisy chain that you need to go and update. The other limitation here is scale. Okay? So we'll take a look at an example of the scaling limitation. Really simple example here. We're going to look at 3 applications that may be within your organization. You have a CRM system. You have an ERP system, and you have a construction management system. Now let's talk about integrating some data from a point-to-point or connector approach. You may need to integrate some customer data between your CRM and your ERP, right? Get your sales pipeline and your financial system in sync from your customer perspective. You're also going to need to have those customers in your construction management application. So now you are needing to build a data integration point here between your ERP and your CM. You also probably have some data that is in each one of these systems that does not have to live in all of the systems, but your CRM and your construction management system may need to share some data that your ERP doesn't care about. So you may need to build another integration point here. Same thing with vendor. So you integrate your vendor data. You are sending that to multiple different systems. Same thing with your project data, and we understand here that, again, this is high level. There's a lot of other integration points, especially around your projects with your transactional data that need to be passed back and forth. So what we built here is a very simple point-to-point connector-driven integration. Now the limitations here from a scale perspective come when you need to add another system to the equation. You need to replace a system that's already in there, or maybe you're a company that has multiple sub-companies running multiple ERPs, multiple CRMs, right? So this can really expand from a scale perspective when it actually goes into practice.
Just a couple bits to add here too from a lot of experience working in environments that look like this is if we just were looking at the customer map alone, where we've got 3 systems where we're trying to get customers to talk, Procore and Sage Intacct have a fabulous connector that makes that particular exchange of information pretty seamless. And maybe Salesforce and Sage Intacct have an equally fabulous connector. And maybe Salesforce and Procore have an equally fabulous connector. But the chances that somebody else has tested that exact daisy chain and what happens when we update in one system and push to another system and that we don't end up with conflicts is near zero. Even with these really robust, commercially built, tested and utilized by hundreds of organizations, nobody looks exactly like your organization, and nobody has wired those 3, and let's be honest, it's not 3, it's 4 or 5 or 6 systems together in exactly that way, and these things start to fight. And Riley and I can tell you, like, we're too young for the amount of gray hair that we have, because we have done so many of these where you start to try and untangle that nest and find yourself in a position where you really don't have anywhere to go other than to maybe turn one off or start to figure out how we start to build something custom for one of those linkages to try to mitigate the pain that is these fighting daisy chain connectors, which is how I talk about it a lot.
So one of these scenarios that I talked about was a replacement of a system. So let's say your ERP here is an old ERP, you want to upgrade your ERP, out with the old, in with the new. In this, again, very simple integration architecture here, you are looking at 6 integration data flows that you may need to update to rip and replace your ERP. iPaaS is the solution for this that allows you to scale effectively within your integration architecture. So iPaaS, integration platform as a service. Okay, this is a cloud-based integration platform, centralizes all of your integration development, your management, your error handling, your data within that central hub, which is the iPaaS. A little bit more here on iPaaS versus those connectors or point-to-point integration, right? This allows you to get creative with your integration architecture. Okay? So pub-sub model is a type of integration architecture that we often hear our clients come to us and say, hey, I want to utilize this. Okay? Take a look at what this looks like using the same example that we walked through with the point-to-point connectors. Here, what we've designed is an integration architecture using iPaaS and a data hub as your central repository. Your data is starting to flow in and out of the data hub instead of doing all these daisy chains that can be complicated and very prone to errors. Using the same example of ripping and replacing an ERP, you have your old ERP here, out and in. In this example, you've reduced those 6 data integration points that we saw previously down to 3. Right? New system comes in, you add it to this pub sub architecture, integrating that data with the data hub, and a lot of that data is probably already residing there. So we'll move over to Pat, who will talk a little bit about the Aldridge Electric story. Now, Aldridge Electric was not in this very immature integration strategy. They had a homegrown iPaaS system, but there's other benefits than what I've talked about that Pat will speak to on why iPaaS allows you for better management of your integrations.
All right, so I will talk to some of these blue squares a bit, but our story really starts with that. I will give props to my development team. I would say we have a fairly sophisticated development group right now, and they've really made all the integrations that we currently have with other tools from our ERP going into these SaaS tools, which kind of reminded me of that Home Alone scene that we saw earlier where we just got stuff going all over the place. One of the bigger issues we had with that is it really took too long to troubleshoot some of these issues whenever they came up, like some of the stuff that they were talking about, even when we built it ourselves. The biggest problem is then you needed to find that developer or have that level person look into a problem when it was there, when 9 times out of 10, someone just screwed up some import or changed some data around, but it still took us a couple hours to find that out. So because of this, we started looking into an iPaaS probably 2 years ago, maybe more. But it's so hard to make this transition into an iPaaS when you see this additional cost and you know you're already doing it. So is it really worth it? And so we decided to push it off until we talked to Wipfli, and they know how to get us to open our pocketbooks. So no, we teamed up with them because we were going through an ERP transition. So as we started going through this path, they brought up the iPaaS again, and we're like, okay, maybe this is the time. And everybody's aware of why we really need it. We want to get closer to that data hub model. And when transitioning between the ERPs, we'd like to have some of this work done before it's critical, and we need to make sure we're ready to go. So after working with Wipfli for a while, it was super helpful, pointed us in certain directions. We steered it a little bit differently, ended up with Workato and as our current iPaaS. Can talk to you guys about that later if it's something of interest to you. But we are just now in the early stages of putting this in place. And our procurement to payment application, Coupa, was our first transition into Workato, and it really changed our whole mindset on how to do integrations as well. Along with that data hub model, a lot of the stuff we were doing was like flat files, here's everything, every time, and now we have to start focusing, because we do pay by transactions and stuff, like how do we bring this back to just the changes? So we're looking at all of our data for that. And then how can we even get it more real time if all we're doing is putting up a small amount of data? And the iPaaS is really allowing us to get there. So really we're building now with changing the source of some of this data, that ERP in mind. That's what really got us to make this move. And our next step now is a lot of these tools have built-in AI features to help us really rock through some of these integrations even faster. So I think Riley has a little more to talk about, Ryan has more to talk about on AI.
Okay, so to get a little bit of a sense for where we're at in the room, we're going to talk about this on 2 dimensions when we think about AI. I know I'm coming in hot directly after a Procore keynote, so I'm not going to ask about our sentiments on AI and whether we're feeling like we're in a state where this is a little bit overhyped, or in a state where our businesses are going to be radically transformed by what this means for white-collar work and work in systems in the office, and the same in the field. So you guys can all guess where I lean on my enthusiasm for how this is going to affect things. But the first thing I want to get a show of hands on, I'm just going to break you guys into kind of we're bullish and we're aggressive, or we're more in the not so aggressive camp, and that is on the curiosity that exists inside of your organization. So if you feel like, and start by raising your hand if you're in the camp of our organization is not really generally curious at all about AI, and then we'll break into those that are. So who's feeling like their org is not particularly curious? Doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it seems like maybe a third of us. Okay, so who's got an organization that they feel like at the various levels is generally quite curious about what this might mean? Okay, this is awesome. We're in a tech forward room, so we're at a tech conference. This isn't terribly surprising, but literally, I don't know if you guys could tell from wherever you were sitting, but for those in the front, like 90% of the hands I saw were curious. Now, when it comes to adoption, we're going to start now with those that are actually making investments in training or in systems that are AI-oriented. So if you feel like your organization is generally making some investments, raise your hand. Wow. Okay. If you feel like, man, they're not, whether your opinion is, we wish they were not, raise your hand if we're just really not making those investments. Okay, so it's kind of a third and two-thirds for you guys. What I want to kind of bring us home with, we've got 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to spend half of that time making sure we take questions because we don't have a ton of time to get into all the protein in the meat. We can certainly talk afterwards as well, but I want to spend a few minutes giving you guys some artillery to help take to the leaders inside of your organization and to the ranks and file inside of your organization on furthering what it is that we can do to make things that kind of suck about our day-to-day less painful, and how we advance the cause. So when we think about these use cases, there's really like two broad categories when it comes to AI, and I'll get into that in a second. But I give a whole talk on this specifically, and it's kind of about robots in the office and robots in the field, and CFMA is an audience that is way more CFOs than it is operations folks. Quick raise of hands if you're part of more of like the finance and accounting function in your organization. Will you raise your hand? Wow. Okay, cool. I was expecting mostly operations. So operations, raise your hand. 50-50, amazing. So a lot of times I'm talking to a CFO type audience, and that isn't necessarily the persona inside of the organization that you picture to be super forward thinking and forward leaning around like, let's go all in and take some big financial risk on investing in automated tooling to see if we can advance this more AI-oriented cause. But the finance function does tend to have pretty significant authority over the technology function, right? Like a lot of times the IT director in our firms reports to the CFO. And so it kind of is incumbent upon me to impress upon the CFOs in the room that this is like, if you're not going to do this, and we are facing any type of competitive threat here relative to firms that are doing it, right? Firms that are getting curious, getting this culture instantiated inside of their organization so that we're not making this just the C-suite's problem and not just the field's problem to figure out how we're going to stay competitive if our peers are investing, or if there's venture capital backed or private equity backed firms that think they're going to come in and disrupt our space. And we can all be skeptical about whether that's going to happen, right? But it's just, what if the bigger firms, what if there are some firms that are really getting there on automation and we start to face pricing pressure relative to those, right? The finance function tends to be needing to do so. And I actually start that talk with a slide that shows a picture of these guys that it was the last time every human that was alive was on Earth. It was in Kazakhstan in 2001 when they were launching that first crew up to the International Space Station. And since then, there's never been another group, or there's never been a point at which everybody was here. And the point was there was this guy that talked about why does NASA exist? Why do countries invest in space programs? They invest to do two things. First is actually to, it's an inspirational rallying thing, right? We get our country, our people, we get them excited about what it is that's possible. But then there's actual scientific discoveries that come out of this type of thing, right? Like we actually get treatments related to, for example, osteoporosis and bone loss, right? When we're in zero gravity, we get to study what it is that does for bones, and that affects treatments and drug discovery for problems that exist here on Earth, right? And the same is true inside of our organizations, right? Like if we are not an organization of a size, and I can see some logos on shirts, so I know that some of our organizations are big enough that we have an innovation director, right, inside of our organization, or director of field technology that's out there leading the charge. But some of us are smaller organizations where it is us as the CFO, as the operations leadership, where we need to start to build this enthusiasm and figure out what our moonshots look like inside of our organization. So when we think about AI moonshots, a lot of CEOs will say, okay, Ryan, fine, I'm with you, like we ought to do it, but what on earth am I, like where would I start on that whole thing? What is Gen AI really gonna do inside of my organization? Or how can I actually even take a step in the right direction? And iPaaS, to me, is absolutely number one or number two. And the thing that it's tied with in terms of number two is a data lakehouse or a data warehouse. But we talked about that data hub. Now I'm not going to try and get into the details on what a data hub means relative to your data warehouse or your data lakehouse that you want. But point super quickly, data hub is super point-in-time traffic manager, right? We don't have all the historical versions of a contact's phone number or of the size of a particular project net of all of the change orders that arose over the course of that project. And a data warehouse is going to have all of that dimensionality and granularity. That data, the data hub is going to be simpler. But these things relate, right? And so if we think about this future state where we've potentially got this opportunity to build a bot that looks a little bit like the Procore Copilot, right? We're thinking about being in Microsoft Teams and having a conversation, and Riley's asking me, or Pat's asking me, why is this job over budget? And instead of us then going and pinging another person who's going to open up Procore and surface a report and start to look at which change orders aren't getting signed or which ones weren't identified early enough, we can at the Procore bot and bring it into the conversation, right? To start to collaborate with us and answer questions and point us to the source data, point us to the records, point us to the things that are going to start to tell that story, and eventually get us to a point where we've got an agent that's an early warning system about safety issues, about financial performance and job overruns, about timeline slippage because we don't have people on site where we need them, or we don't have materials on site when we needed them, right? So iPaaS and the data lakehouse is something that I speak a lot about. I've written a couple ebooks on, and we've got out there that I'd encourage you guys to find, pretty easy to Google, and think about taking that message forward to the other people that you need to build consensus, because there is no way that even if there's 2 or 3 of you from a given company sitting together in this room, that just 1 or 2 or 3 people can build the groundswell to make the size investment that needs to be made to start to move beyond this point of swivel chair integration life or daisy chain connector life, and ultimately start to move into something where we are very much building a central traffic manager for the data that moves across all of our critical apps in our organizations, positioning ourselves to be in a place where we can hot swap apps, or if we're in a state where we do a lot of M&A, hot swap whole subsidiaries and companies where we've got multiple ERPs, multiple construction management systems, even if it's just multiple instances of Viewpoint or Procore or Sage or any other system that we've got in the mix, right? So these moonshots are important. If we want to stay competitive, have an edge, have a moat, we need to be thinking a lot about our systems actually being able to talk, our data all being in one place, and we need to really focus on communication about what the future looks like, about robots that are walking around on our peers and our competitors' job sites, and how we are instantiating a culture of curiosity and technical literacy around these topics inside of our organization. So we're going to take questions, but just want to thank you guys all for giving us a little bit of time to talk through our points of view, and thank you, Pat, for joining us to tell your story.
Absolutely.
Do we have questions? Do we have a mic in the back that we could jump up with if anybody's got one? Raise your hand if you've got a question for us. We can answer on the fly. Up front? Just hold on one second. I want to make sure everybody can hear.
test. Here we go. So yeah, out of curiosity, I'm sure there's a lot of contractors in the room that have set up that Procore connector, whether that's between the financials module and Sage or Viewpoint or QuickBooks, whatever that might be. So is there a form of an iPaaS that would be able to, like, is this an alternative, just to better understand what an iPaaS is actually doing? Is that an alternative to the existing connectors that Procore is offering to create that stronger kind of data syncing experience? And this question from my chair, actually, I'm coming as a software provider that plugs data into the financials module, procurement to payment automation software, actually. But we often hear from contractors is, are you pushing your data into the Procore financial module or into the back-end accounting system? So I think a lot of that connectivity between Procore and then back-end accounting, I think, is big, and how understanding how the iPaaS connection could be better than what's out there today.
Totally. So let's take a look quick at one of these diagrams. So here's the key way I think about your question. We today, in most of our organizations, probably have like 30 different connectors or integrations. And so there is not an implementation approach that involves one day turning off all of our existing integrations, and then the next day we're in our iPaaS, our new house, that's got everything talking, right? What we're doing, essentially, is as we move from this state where we've got a bunch of those point-to-points that might be serving us just fine, right? We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, everything's got to go, we need to move. But when we start to build the data, we build the data hub, right? That doesn't exist in a lot of our organizations. And so we identify what things either are super screwed up in how they talk today or what things don't talk, and we build that first. And then we continue the march to try to centralize as much as possible. We have, like, we could talk about this for 4 or 5 hours. There are things that that aren't customizable about regular connectors, right? And so we've always got a backlog of suboptimal elements about how the integration between two particular things work. And so then we end up basically wanting to prioritize what's the next thing, what's the next thing, what's the next thing that we're going to build into our data hub architecture, where, frankly, Aldridge may be in a spot 3 years from now is probably a somewhat optimistic guess, where no existing off-the-shelf commercial connectors exist, and that won't be because they had a dogmatic, like, we will not use anything that isn't through the data hub, but rather they got through all the critical things that weren't integrated, they got through the things that were problematic, and now the last and final benefit is, let's get rid of that last commercial off-the-shelf connector just so that it's all in a single pane of glass and we have one traffic manager and one way that this all works, because asterisks require extra documentation and extra potential points of failure that are on the edges or on the seam. So I don't think that there's an all or nothing world. I think this is a journey, and I think once you get on it, I don't know if I should be so transparent about this or not, but I don't know that we're ever done, right? I mean, we're always going to be introducing new systems. The technology march probably will continue, right? And so we're always going to have more that we need to bring online into this architecture, and none of these things get done super fast.
Thank you.
Question in the back, Elaine? Hold on, let's wait for the mic. It's for, there's a virtual audience, it's for posterity.
That's good, that's good. Thank you. So my question is, when you say we build the data hub, who's we? And my second question is, how do I start to engage with Wipfli?
Okay, so Pat, talk a little bit about that, right? Pat's got an $800 million organization with 1,500 employees and 5 or 6 developers. That looks different in terms of how they take that on and how much outside help they need from an organization that's got 1 or 2 people in IT. And remember, it's not always about size of organization. It's also sometimes just about our strategy and our disposition, right? Do we heavily build capabilities inside of our firm, or do we heavily outsource? We know some firms have 0 IT people, even though they're $200-300 million in revenue. So talk a little bit about that, Pat. How'd you guys think through that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it came down to a really good hire from a developer that we got that it's in charge of that group right now, and brought a lot of knowledge from other industries into ours as to help facilitate building that. And that, so from a very early stage, we started piecing stuff together, and that helped. But really then engaging with Wipfli assisted and helped us to re-engage like how we should look at it and how to build it correctly so that it will integrate best with other tools.
We've got a question up front. Thank you, Elaine.
mentioned PubSub, and I was just going to ask, what value does the Data Hub add with regards to maybe time series data? Are you able to report on historical trends in a way that maybe Procore doesn't allow you to?
I'm going to definitely let Riley say a couple words here, but so time series data, just raise your hand if PubSub is a word you've heard before as an architectural format. Super small percentage, so we better define that. Okay, point is, like, old school integrations, like when I started my career, was a thing where we overwrote the entire target table. We took the entire source contact table and just took a text file and overwrote the whole future state thing. Patrick talked a little bit about wanting to get down to a more atomic unit of like what data changed, right? And we can get even more down to this messaging-based thing where every one of these systems in the mix is either a publisher or a subscriber or both, but down to the specific unit of data. So if a phone number changes, who needs to know about it, right? Phone number is not time series data. Time series data is probably something more like the size of a total project contract, or like how over or under budget we are, right? So time series data and Data Hub, I mean, I said this is the thing we probably don't totally get into, but the Data Hub is just managing the point in time, like what value was the old value and the new value, but not what was the value before that, before that, before that, before that. That's what the data warehouse is. And so essentially, on this hub, Databricks or Snowflake or Microsoft Fabric, a data warehouse is probably another endpoint, and we use this concept called this type 7 slowly changing dimensions, right? And that's where we write every historical value for every tip, where efficient, where it's of any use, right? And the data warehouse is definitely where that snapshot, so that we can roll, basically, right, we think about this 5D thing, right? Like the fourth dimension is, well, cost, and the fifth dimension is time, right? We want to be able to see what was the size of our pipeline or our backlog, or the size, amount of profit versus profit fade over time. And so the data warehouse is where we think a lot of that stuff belongs, not knowing your specific application architecture.
I was just really curious about, the event streaming and how that would play into time series insights, like, for example, maybe a data cube.
Anything else to add on that?
Yeah, I guess as it relates to that, right, the PubSub model, to talk about that a little bit more and how it relates to event stream, right, is there is some action that takes place, and that is a trigger to send that data to your data hub. Now you can do your hashing, all of your data management from an integration perspective within the hub, so that you get to the point that Pat was trying to get, within his organization, where you're not rewriting all data, you're only making that modification that needs to occur, okay? So this data gets sent to the data hub, and then there's a flag that is risen, right, and says every one of, what part of these subscribers need to pull that data. And so that's when you can start to build real-time, right, type integrations, or close to real-time integrations, using those, specific data changes through your data hub out to multiple subscribers at a single point in time.
Anything you want to add on that? Any other questions? One more over here. Thank you, guys.
I've got a question related to, sorry, that was loud. This is really great. I love the concepts here, Data Hub here inside of an organization. Shifting the focus a little bit between you as the organization servicing your customer, the owner. What have you guys seen, or have you solved, the organization's data hub and then the owner's data hub? Because effectively all the data needs to be transferred to owner at some point. What have you seen there? How are you solving it? Has it been solved?
My somewhat tongue-in-cheek answer is, like, if the owner has their own Procore, we're a little bit in business. I mean, certainly we've worked with owners who have said, yeah, we've got this SharePoint situation, and because we don't have Procore, we have this, this policy around what it is that we actually make them provide to us. But we can all imagine what that looks like, right? Like, even if all of your general contractors that built all your courthouses, in the example I was thinking of, all use Procore, the way that they hand you the details at the end of that project, and then the way we absorb it, like, what are the chances that that's going to be of any use, right? Probably none. If we are a contractor and we have a data warehouse, and now we have a contractual obligation to provide that data to the owner at the end of the project, Does us having really solid systems help with that? I'm sure it does, but I'm not sure it's a complete solve. I think, I mean, when we think about differentiation, building moat by making better investments in technology, this is probably an opportunity to innovate a little bit on the marketing front and at least say, hey, we've got our stuff together with regard to systems, we've got a data model that we package up our project information and can provide to you as an owner. And so, not to be cynical about it, but I would say at this moment in time, it's probably more of a marketing opportunity than it is a technology opportunity, but that's something you could never offer if you were in a swivel chair world and you were on QuickBooks and some subpar project management system, or you managed your projects via Excel and emails, right? Okay, we're over time, so unfortunately we can't take any more questions. Thank you guys so much for asking good questions, and we'll be up here if you want to talk more.